Alright, picking up where we left off in Chapter 13, we are now talking about building a global transportation web. The United States remained primarily an exporter of raw materials and an importer of manufactured goods. In most years, the country imported more than it exported. Cotton was the most valuable export and textiles the leading import. So think about that. We're sending out cotton and we're bringing back in cloth made from that same cotton, more than likely. Britain was the leading consumer of American exports and America's leading supplier. The success of sailing packets concentrated trade in large port cities. Smaller ports languished. Several smaller port cities in New England maintained prosperity by concentrating on whaling, which boomed between 1830 and 1860. Increased foreign trade spurred the construction of ships and the development of large, fast clipper ships. This is a painting of the American clipper ship, the Red Jacket, off of Cape Horn as it sailed from Australia to Liverpool, England in 1854. Now the cool thing about these ships is, yes, they are a lot faster than your big bulky ships, but the problem with these small clipper ships is that there's not enough room for large amounts of cargo. So in the end, it's not economically sustainable way of transporting goods back and forth. By the late 1840s, steamships captured most of the transatlantic passenger traffic. Mail contracts and first-class freight, although the fast-sailing ships held their own on very long voyages for many years. Britain's mastery of iron technology negated the traditional advantages of American shipbuilders had enjoyed and gave Britain the lead in the development of iron ships, which were larger, stronger, and less costly to maintain. Shipping rates declined, which encouraged immigration from Europe. Canal building continued in the 1830s and 40s, and each year saw more western produce moved to market through the canals. The first American railroads were built in the 1830s. These first railroads did not compete with canals for intersectional traffic. The through connections needed to move goods economically over great distances materialized slowly. Competition among railroad companies prevented connections, and engineering problems impeded growth. So a lot of times you would have these railroads that would come through and be built, and the railroad tracks actually wouldn't match up with the other railroads, so you couldn't connect them because these different companies were competing for them. By the 1850s, however, these problems had been solved, and by the end of the decade, the Pennsylvania Railroad crossed the mountains. Railroad construction proceeded more slowly in the South than in the West, where it stimulated other kinds of economic activity. Businesses became larger and more complex structures, requiring more capital and employing salaried managers. Again, this is just a picture. This is found on page 296 in your book, and it shows the major trunk lines carrying long-distance traffic crisscross the areas east of the Mississippi. And you can tell by this, the North does have a very extensive rail grid, more so than the South. The North and the West are going to be linked, while the South is not tightly as connected to the national economy. I mean, look at Texas. Our railroads connect cities, but not states in Texas. And kind of the same thing in, a little bit in Louisiana. They do connect with some major railways in Mississippi, but we're not nearly as connected in the South as they are in the North, and that's going to hurt us during the war. Railroad construction required immense amounts of labor and capital. Immigrants, and in the South, slaves, did most of the work. Private investors provided most of the money invested in railroads before 1860. Towns, counties, and states also lent money to railroads, invested in railroad stock, and granted special privileges to railroads, including tax exemptions and the right to condemn property. Others in the business were unshamedly crooked and avidly took advantage of the public passion for railroads. Between the mid-1840s and the mid-1850s, the United States experienced remarkable growth in manufacturing, agricultural production, population, railroad mileage, gold production, and sales of public land. The American system had arrived. Land-grant railroads stimulated agricultural expansion by selling farm sites at low rates on liberal terms. Access to world markets provided an incentive to agricultural production, and labor remained scarce, but new machines, including the steel plowshare and the McCormick reaper, helped ease the labor shortage. Proliferation of trunk lines and competition from the canal system led to a sharp decline in freight and passenger rates. This is another map found on page 298, just showing you that cotton was central to the southern economy, while tobacco was the primary crop in Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky. And wheat was the key crop in the upper Midwest, and corn was grown nearly everywhere. But you can see from this map that cotton is still king in the South. Eastern seaports benefited from the railroads, as did intermediate centers such as Buffalo, Cincinnati, and Chicago. Railroads also stimulated other economic activity. They spurred regional concentration of industry and investment banking. The economic integration of East and West stimulated nationalism and became a force for preserving the Union. Which is crazy if you think about it. Our economy is actually going to try to preserve the United States, because you have the South that's buying into crops and the North that's buying the crops from the South, and the South that's buying into the industry and the crops of the North. It's kind of a hand-in-hand relationship going on between the North and the South that actually creates this bond. Unfortunately, slavery is going to end up being the thing that does break up the North and the South. Increased production and cheap transportation meant more income and an improved standard of living for Western farmers. Without railroads and canals and the link they provided to Eastern markets, the Midwest would not have likely sided against the South in 1861. Failure to build a railroad system of its own cost the South its influence in the Old Northwest. Growth inevitably caused dislocations and a serious economic collapse in 1857, checked agricultural expansion, which hurt the railroads and cut down on demand for manufactured goods. As a result, unemployment increased. The vigor of the economy soon ended the economic downturn. The economic panic had its greatest impact on the upper Mississippi Valley. It had little effect on the South because cotton prices remained high in the South. But before the economy could swing upward, the war came. This is a timeline for you, just kind of talking about slavery and what all is going on in the United States between 1808 and 1857. So remember, 1808, Congress is going to ban further importation of slaves. 1822, we've got Denmark-Vesey's conspiracy. 1830, Baltimore and Ohio Railroad begins operation. 1831, we have another slave uprising. Then in 1837, McCormick convinced the reaper to harvest wheat. And 2 years later, John Deere begins manufacturing steel plows. 1842, Massachusetts declared unions legal in Commonwealth versus Hunt. And in 1857, we have that brief economic depression and that collapse of that surging economy. That was the thing that was keeping the United States together. But because of the Panic of 1857, we're going to see the United States is now even more sectionalized.